Hey everyone, welcome back to Sales Space. We paused for a while, but now we're back on track, and our first guest is Dr. Armen Kherlopian, data scientist, investor, and entrepreneur. He is board director of Scylla and founding partner of BAJ Accelerator, which helps startups develop their product and go to market. So, without further ado, let's get in a rocket. Okay, hi again, everyone. So, Armen is here with us today. Hi, Armen Jan. Thanks for coming here. How are you?
Fantastic. Pleasure to be on the line.
Thanks. So let's start very quickly with the introduction. So introduce yourself to our audience, and we'll take it from there.
Sure thing, Eric. Greetings, everyone. My name is Dr. Armen Kherlopian. I am an entrepreneur, scientist, and investor. My work spans specifically from enabling small startups to become significant chunks of the economy of countries around the world.
That's wonderful. So scientist, investor, and entrepreneur, like this is like great to be like a science guy, but to do also like science and investment also. And I saw you started your career as a scientist, and you decided to found a startup as well. So tell us what that is and why you decided to just not get a job, but to start your own business.
Sure thing, Eric. So indeed, coming out of my academic research, so I first started at Columbia University, specifically studying biomedical engineering with a focus on algorithms. So did a lot of coding associated with medical imaging, MRI, positron emission tomography, different types of X-ray, and subsequently did my graduate work in biophysics coming out of biomedical engineering, and did that at Cornell, and then subsequently spent some time from that transition between the two universities, also at Princeton University, working in high performance computing and AI. And I always had a scale out and impact driven inkling, as in my academic research. I saw people viewing the publications, citing the publications, and I saw entrepreneurship as a way to get science out into society, doing that specific via specific products. So my first startup experience was quite early and quite formative.
Yeah. And what was it? Like, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So this is back in the early 2000s. The company's name is Medfolink. We did very early natural language processing on emergency room data. So, for example, someone would enter an ER, and there would be the medic would convey a chief complaint, or the patient would articulate a chief complaint, namely, fell off my bicycle, injured my knee. Or if the patient is unconscious, the medic, the ambulance operator will say cardiac arrest. And you can have all sorts of things in this data, from like animal attacks to that of slips and falls to that of things that require police reporting. And so what we had done early at that time was connect data from different New York City hospitals and do that public health analysis. So some great publications and great outcomes. And that was startup experience number one.
Yeah, that's actually very impressive, to start a startup with, to be like, to start your first startup with that kind of field. That's great. And we talk usually here a lot about sales and business development. So what's your perspective on these related fields?
One thing I've come to learn as a scientist going into to industry is that you run across different business cultures. I remember, for example, coming out of graduate school, and I would have cross-functional team members, and you come to appreciate different frames of reference. So, for example, a legal colleague near the end of a project would say, let's delete the data. And as a scientist, it's like, well, how could you even suggest something? Maybe it could be used for future generations. There's a record. you could always analyze the data again. There might be something you missed. And then when you look at it from a risk management point of view, they're making the assertion that, okay, there's less likely to be a data breach if the data is not there. And then if you look to the finance colleagues, it's like, well, there's archaic laws around, you have to keep records for 7 years because there's a cost with the paper filing cabinets.
Yeah.
And you realize quite quickly that entrepreneurs are at the vanguard of this, pushing ahead, what's maximally valuable. And with that comes, importantly, risk and reward.
Got it. So you say that, and I can relate this to me myself because we sometimes like deleting the data. I'm like 100% against that. But sometimes you understand that, okay, this is not valuable right now. To keep it on on servers or just to do something is not valuable. But some people from other fields telling you that we need to do this because I don't know, the law is that we need to keep this for 7 years, but there is no value on that, right? Yeah, entrepreneurs I think are really people who are looking for value, not just the
Yeah.
processes, results.
And indeed, Eric, with our respective Armenian backgrounds, I think there's this idea of keeping a historical record that's really profound, to one's identity. And so to your question, around sales, there's this item about everything is sales. There's also this idea that everything is a negotiation.
Yeah.
And for my scientific and entrepreneurship frame of reference, it became very clear that you have to advocate for good ideas. The best ideas don't always win. And so when I subsequently took up a post at 100,000 person company, serving as the chief science officer.
Yeah.
So the one company had equivalent personnel of a workforce of an entire country. So this is the scale we're talking about.
Yeah.
I would get calls quite often from the chief marketing officer. Armen, what's the latest innovation? What has your sub team done? What are we driving? And so if you even look at the academic literature, how that's evolved, it used to be you would publish your academic paper. Now professors are tweeting about their papers. There's implicit agreements about cross-referencing. So getting the word out, advocating for a good product is core to sales. It's a word I actually rarely use. You had an earlier guest on this fantastic podcast, Stephen Haroyan, an absolute fantastic professional. And so when I hear sales, I hear growth, I hear advocacy, and it's a really important topic. So congrats again, Eric, on the launch of this the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Armen, once again. And yeah, I totally agree with you on that, because right now sales is no more about like giving something instead of receiving money instead of it. This era, I think, is over. Sales is much more than that. I believe that sales is finding the value that you need to provide and providing this value to the customer and receiving growth instead of that. I mean, this growth can be in form of money, in form of customer base, in form of just feeling fantastic because you provided some value to some guy, right? And I think that from 60s and 70s, everything changed. And there was a term, maybe you have heard about this term, which is called Cadillac Man. You know that term?
Please elaborate more.
Yeah, so Cadillac Man was where Cadillac Man were people selling cars in the dealerships. So they are like sleazy, they are very persuasive, they're trying to get rid of that car and get your money. And so research shows that lots of people feel bad about sales, don't want to go into sales field, don't trust salespeople because of this era of 60s and 70s. But everything changed with the internet, because customers right now have like more information about the product than the seller itself, like himself. So when you try to persuade someone, he already knows the technical information, the features, everything. So you kind of try not to show the features, but try to show the value that the person will get buying that.
Yeah, thank you for the historical note there. I believe most folks are familiar with the cliche of the car salesman.
Yeah,
And in many ways, part of that still exists today. And what you've noted is that there's been shifts enabled by different technology. So, for example, an innovative startup by definition doesn't have much brand awareness because they're recently launched, their solution type could be new. And so
yeah,
how do they get to market? There's different approaches around writing thought leadership, developing deep relationships with customers that have a significant pain point, being earnest about solving that pain point. And so I certainly prefer the frame of reference of business development. You can
hmm,
have great innovations from the laboratory, but how do you get it out there to the world? And so you
yeah,
have steps along the way that can be involved for securing intellectual property. It can be around initial pilot customers. And it really comes down to having a vision of the world as it could be. Some of the work I've done with dear colleagues, I mentioned my first startup, great co-founding team with
yeah,
dear colleagues today, co-founder of the BAJ Accelerator. So
yeah,
we have seen the go-to-market journeys of over 100 companies from nearly 20 countries. And it's fascinating to see the national culture, the different types of business culture versus the intersection of the customer culture on
yeah,
these fantastic products. And Eric, in honor of the title of your podcast, I have a space background behind me. And one of the illustrious startups that have come through BAJ is Scylla, where
yeah,
I have the privilege of serving also as a board director. And Scylla's products are quite innovative, using computer vision for physical security. So
hmm,
it's not a system in a car to drive itself, but it's a system in a stadium to find a missing child, a system out front of a hotel lobby to see if two people are fighting, in a hospital context if someone has slipped and fall.
hmm,
And in those three very different examples, you have different value propositions around reducing risk to human life, reducing liability,
yeah,
and acting as a force multiplier for human labor. So I find personally the crafting of these stories that the startups are advocating for to be the norm in society
yeah,
quite fascinating, because there's a direct tie to that type of innovation sale. When you have conviction in a product, you have a belief on the world as it should be. And I find this absolutely exciting. And I find the Estonia use case incredible, how Estonia was able to double its economy from 2004 to 2008.
yeah,
Israel's example, Singapore's example, and thinking of Armenia in particular, if Switzerland was known in the previous century as making as high quality watches,
yeah,
well, countries like Armenia can be fantastic in computer vision in an area of AI, or
yeah,
even in social robotics. So as you can see, I'm quite excited around getting these ideas to market because they create value and they make an impact.
yeah. So I'm 100% with you on that field, because I see a trends of Armenia working like towards that being in leader in technology. I totally see that. I'm not sure whether it will be computer science or like uh, AI or anything else, but I see that Armenia is really working on becoming scientific and like technology leader in the maybe hopefully in the world, but we need to get there yet. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you also mentioned that you are working with lots of startups, and there are like lot of different cultures you mentioned. Let's talk a little bit about the styles of sales that they do, like how they vary from each other.
Yeah, one fascinating framework I've come across is
Yeah.
in an old Forbes piece. It's called the three personas you would want on the founding team of a startup, and they're called the hacker, the hustler, and the hipster. And
Okay.
the idea is you need these three roles, both to build a product and to get it to market. And the framework highlights risks if you have one of the personas missing. So, for example, if it's only the hacker and the hipster, you're basically running fake sales calls. Like you go hang out with the client, but you're not actually trying to secure the contract or get it done. Or if it's just the hustler and the hacker, the company really doesn't have much of a soul. Like the hipster adds that aspect of good culture. And if it's just a hustler and a hipster, you don't have a product that's worth anything. So it's this idea in 1, 2, 3, 4 per people, depending on the personas, how can you have a great product, which I assert is required for good sales.
Yeah.
The past example is, well, if you have a bad product, it's going to be a bad experience all around.
Yeah.
And so I find when a team is led by one of these personas, it shifts dramatically how they interact with the customer. Like without that hustle activity, the collaborations just die from time. If there isn't that hipster, like, what do we stand for? If a company stands for sustainability, which is an area I'm quite passionate about in addition to AI, you have to actually care about reducing carbon emissions, and you can't be indifferent to it. Like, it has to permeate the interactions and even the product. So I find that professional dynamic absolutely fascinating. And at BAJ, my work as an investor at Covenant Venture Capital, we're working with much more mature companies. We're interacting with family offices via Mount Global. It's really fascinating to assess the founding teams and to support the founding teams. The other items would be culturally. So different cultures have this idea that you should not follow up. You might be annoying someone. By definition, a startup has to follow up. Otherwise, it's unreasonable to expect your fantastic new technology will be adopted in a new context with change costs and all that. So there's these dimensions, the hackler, hustler, hipster framework, the country-specific cultures that overlay. And having done business in 20 countries, running technical teams, doing marquee work in Formula E and healthcare and finance, and work related to the environment, I also find it's really important to immediately understand when you're with a new group of people, and the stakes can be high, to understand what are the norms for communicating and what are the sets of priorities. And if you understand this, you can position what you are doing in a way that has a higher chance for a meaningful collaboration to happen. And I find that keeping that in mind, norms for communicating and what people prioritize actually differs in cities within a country. So this is really a high dimensional challenge.
Yeah, you need to really dig deep to understand, to really understand the soul of the people that you're trying to sell something, to be able to show them that there is a value on that, right? Like, you need to understand the cultural. Regarding the follow-up, by the way, I today read an article that says 70% of salespeople don't even follow up after the first email. And this is, I read it and I could not believe it, because the first law, I would say, is to follow up. But now that you're talking about the cultural differences, I kind of I started to think maybe they are doing, some of them are doing good not to follow up, because maybe in culture, it's in that particular culture, it's very bad taste to follow up after the first email. Yeah, it's really food for thought. Yeah. And you mentioned a few times about BAJ Accelerator. Can you elaborate a little bit? What is it, what you do there, and what the company itself does?
Sure. So at BAJ, we focus on a 6-day intensive program, and the enablements that the startups gain is access to a fantastic demo day. So if they're,
Yeah,
for example, looking to connect with strategic folks, it can
yeah,
be on customers, it can be on capital formation, it could be on content. And specifically, we work through a lot of these items we've been discussing here, Eric, in terms of how to go to market, how to protect intellectual property, and specifically to craft a product offering that can make a difference.
yeah.
Because a startup's first 10 customers versus its next 20 or next 100 are very different in terms of how you build a business. And this is really important for science-based ventures because if that strategic development of a market doesn't happen,
Mm.
the innovation can languish. So at the BAJ, we have our next program coming up mid-May of this year. Applications are currently open, and folks can apply at bajaccelerator.com. And if individuals that would like to request to the demo days, they can make a request similarly on the website there. And we believe that startups can change the face of nations. We're quite honored to have supported founders from nearly 20 countries. And there's a fantastic dynamic when you consider countries with smaller GDPs.
Yeah,
Startups can actually make a significant portion of that when they scale. So
I believe
it's our
Estonia is a
privilege
great
to enable them.
example. Sorry.
Exactly, exactly. There's the Skype effect. Fantastic
Yep.
BBC article on this, where the rise of one startup cascaded the effect where new angel investors emerge, new founders emerge,
Yeah.
and it's an inspiring story for entire countries and cities around the world. And it's really important that the founders, provide equity to the team members. They, with their growth, they pay very strong taxes that can strengthen the country. They contribute to education
Yeah.
and have these knock-on effects. So we're quite delighted with our team to work on this every day. And from my first startup journey to perhaps my next one, even, it's been really tremendous working with the BAJ team.
That's wonderful, and we will definitely put the BAJ link under the in the description part of this video, under the video, and so that's startups that are looking like watching us right now. Please apply because guys are doing really good job and can help you. Um, and perhaps I wanted to ask this before, but kind of we talked a little bit about other things. So I would say this is the main question of our call today. Uh, Connection of data science and sales, because we all know that knowing your customer is very crucial for sales, but how can data science work for sales and make sales like grow like skyrocket?
Yeah, so I would frame it as such. As a company, startup or otherwise, can you really understand the pain of your customer and articulate that with data? Then different data science methods can be quite powerful around segmentation, around being able to aggregate over time.
Yeah.
So this is critically that articulation of the pain. If we take real estate, for example, you could have different plots of land, but you would need to score which plots of land would need to be, for example, that are fully mountainous, that could be
Mm-hmm.
leveled partially to enable a reclassification of that plot of land to
Mm-hmm.
enable a worthwhile structure, or to
Mm.
not do that because the environment is prioritized. A lot of decisions can be made from the gut, or they can be data driven.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the really exciting ways that data science can have a role in finding the right customers as a function of their pain,
Yeah.
and the right matching to the right products as the ability to mitigate that pain. And along the way, you have to quantify. Along the way, you have to be earnest and diligent. So it's quite an interesting intersection.
Yeah. So can you bring some example of like your work in one of the startups you are engaged with to kind of how you exactly connect data science to sales?
Sure, I'll even comment on a prototype I've been developing and some work with some dear colleagues.
Yeah.
So right now, there is a massive push to reduce carbon emissions. Basically,
Hmm.
how do we make earnest strides to improve the state of the environment? Now, there's important challenges around understanding who is earnest in this. So, in my experience as a C-suite executive at a global enterprise, I have been there during the quarterly earnings calls. So, to date, there are over 58,000 public companies, and we know the largest, the Fortune 500.
Yeah.
So, you have a data science question: who, as in which companies on the different earnings calls, are talking about being more sustainable, reducing the use of plastic, improving their solar output. And as the analysis goes, we can actually pick out who is talking about it and who's not talking about it in this high stakes call. So immediately we're able to see, okay, you have an innovative air quality improvement product. Let's find which of the large companies are serious about this, as in their CEO, CFO, their chief sustainability officer is talking about it during their high stakes earnings call. So this is one immediate example
Yeah.
I'm working on with a set of colleagues. And in many startups, you typically have this nugget of data intelligence or market intelligence to
Yeah.
help engage the right customers, because your first customers really matter because they have to map to your product roadmap. So this market intelligence meets the environment and sustainability and ESG, environment, social governance points, is something I'm quite passionate about. And as we started this talk, considering applications from health, engagement here in terms of the environment, fantastic technologies like Scylla uses this for computer vision. Some
Hmm.
of the BAJ companies that have come through, embodied in social robotics, in
Yeah.
finance, Cognaze. I mean, the case studies and use cases are one more fantastic than the next. And as someone who's quite passionate about innovation, I'm a very strong advocate of making data-driven decisions, ones that can be more impactful and
Hmm.
ones that can help an organization scale and make a difference for society.
Your example is astonishing because I'm in sales, so I know that if you kind of know who is exactly talking about having that problem, like it's three calls. It's really three calls or maybe two emails to kind of convert. Of course, I'm kind of not talking like directly about like three emails or two calls, but really it's very easy to kind of convert a lead if you know that the day before he was talking about having the problem that you're solving. This is great. This is totally great. And the last question I would like to ask you is about like basically you are a co-founder in multiple ventures. So what would be your advice? What advice you will give to the aspiring entrepreneurs?
So I'll relay some advice I had received from a Tour de Force founder,
Yeah.
is that be sure whoever is on your cap table, so that's your co-founders, it's your
Hmm.
investors, your capitalization table, who is
Yeah.
inside your company, who has ownership, is that they share your values.
Hmm.
And that is very easy to say and very hard to do, because to build an enduring innovation based business, we're talking to five plus, sometimes 10 plus year journeys. And so that is absolutely critical, who you align with at the core. The next point I would highlight is, as a technologist, as a scientist, is to have passion more of the problem space you are solving than the technology you have mastery over, because that's what's going to carry through for empathy and meaningful engagement with the customers. And the third is something you said, Eric, to follow up.
Yeah. Yeah, that is crucial, Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Armen, once again. This was like a fantastic talk with you, and I hope that whatever you said will be really helpful to the startups in Armenia and maybe also outside Armenia. So hopefully you will see many applications in your BAJ program, and you will help Armenia to be on the map of technology and science in the world. Thank you.
Pleasure.